It's a strange inheritance gong show.
And this is the set of gongs.
The very set.
A piece of history.
You want to liken it to Stradivarius, except there's only one set of true Puccini gongs.
A musical mystery.
How the heck did they end up in a warehouse in Queens?
But drum roll, please. Can she strike a deal to fund her husband's dying wish?
Are you hoping that someone will see them and say, here's a check?
You better believe it.
I'm Jamie Colby, heading into the town of Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, a suburb about 18 miles north of Manhattan. I'm on my way to meet a woman who wrote to me about her strange inheritance, a piece of musical history with the most improbable tale of how she came to own it.
My name's Marlene Peturo. When my husband died, he left me a musical treasure, along with clear marching orders on what he wanted done with it.
Hi, Marlene.
Hi, Jamie. Come on in. It's so nice to meet you.
As we settle in, Marlene tells me about her harmonious first meeting with her husband, Howard, a concert percussionist.
It was love at first sight, really. He was 6'3", and he had these twinkly blue eyes. He went to work every day in his gig suit and his tuxedo with his white shirt and bow tie.
Howard Van Heining, born in 1936 in Central Florida, inherits an interest in percussion from his great-grandfather, a drummer boy in the Civil War.
Howard had his drumsticks, and he practiced quite a bit, mostly with his drum pad in his bedroom, thank goodness.
Howard joins the drum line in high school, and at just 15 lands a spot in the Orlando Symphony Orchestra.
He was the youngest percussionist that they had, and he did very well.
So well that after high school, Howard heads to the renowned Juilliard School of Music in New York City. There, he adds to his skill set by mastering a variety of drums and buying them up whenever he can.
Not just drums, but anything that you hit, xylophones, bells, anything that was a percussion-type instrument.
Most percussionists are, to some extent, collectors.
Greg Zuber, lead percussionist with New York's Metropolitan Opera.
Percussionists end up in charge of all kinds of instruments, snare drums, cymbals, timpani.
It happens that percussion is my favorite part of any orchestra.
Well, you're a woman of refinement and taste.
I would like to learn something percussion-y.
Absolutely. Let's go do it.
We start with the tambourines.
It's simple to play. You just tap it. Like that?
No, Greg, sorry to disappoint you, but I've seen these played.
Yeah. Well, that's more like the gospel church, but maybe we should switch to castanets.
Okay, ready? And...
Good. That's a good start.
Now it's time for the bass drum.
So think about using your whole arm. Great.
I love the sound
Are you
of
busy
this.
Tuesday? I might be needing a player.
You get to do this for a living.
I get to do this. I get to play with these toys.
And so does Howard. He graduates from Juilliard in 1966 and begins to perform with the New York City Opera. It's not a little deal to be part of the New York City Opera.
Absolutely not.
In 1975, Howard takes on a prestigious summer gig in Central Park. On the calendar, Turandot, an opera written in 1924 by Giacomo Puccini. Now, even if you're no opera buff, you've probably heard the most famous part of Turandot, says Fred Plotkin, author of Opera 101. People recognize it. It's been in a number of films.
It was in Mission Impossible starring Tom Cruise.
Oh, and The Sum of All Fears and The Mirror Has Two Faces, among others.
So we know it very well.
It's a percussionist's dream. There are tam-tams, tubular bells, glockenspiel, and most crucially, several different sized gongs.
It's set in ancient mythical China, and Puccini wanted to convey mystery.
I won't get into the plot right now, but those gongs are really important to the story. So when Puccini's writing the opera, he looks all over Italy for just the right gongs. No luck. Then he does what any perfectionist would.
Puccini had gongs manufactured specifically for Turandot so that he could have those ethereal Chinese sounds that he heard in his head, but had not necessarily seen an instrument to produce.
A half-century later and half a world away, Howard Van Heining harbors the same perfectionist streak. Preparing for his big moment in Central Park, he searches for a set of gongs worthy of Puccini's masterpiece. Turns out, Howard doesn't have to look far. Just across the East River from Manhattan to the humble outer borough, made famous by the New York Mets, Archie Bunker, and Kevin James. How the heck did they end up in a warehouse in Queens?
Everything ends up in a warehouse in Queens.
But first, our strange inheritance quiz question. Which band employed the most drummers through the years? Pearl Jam, Nirvana, or Spinal Tap? The answer after the break. So, which of these three bands had the most drummers? Well, Nirvana had 6 drummers through the years. That beats Pearl Jam's 5. But if you count the fictional heavy metal group Spinal Tap, it had as many as a dozen, some of whom died of spontaneous human combustion.
You don't need to know a lot about opera to appreciate the strangeness of the inheritance Marlene Peturo gets from her husband, Howard Van Heining. But a little bit of knowledge can't hurt. So let's go back to Lucca, Italy, 1924. Maestro Giacomo Puccini is composing the second act of his masterpiece, Turandot.
Turandot is a princess. She's beautiful, of course. She does not want to marry anyone because her ancient relative had bad luck with men. So she tells 3 riddles. And if you can answer the riddles, then you get to marry Turandot. If you don't answer the riddles, you lose your head.
Off with you.
Yeah, it's a brutal story.
When each suitor arrives at the palace, he bangs a bronze gong. But Puccini can't find gongs that make the sounds he wants, so he commissions a family of cymbal makers in Italy to handcraft them.
The great composers like Puccini often had instruments manufactured to produce sounds that did not exist before.
His precise gongs are completed, but Puccini dies in 1924 before finishing his masterpiece. How many famous operas are there that are unfinished?
Very few, and the most famous of all is Turandot by Puccini.
A ringer named Franco Alfano finishes Turandot based on Puccini's notes. And it becomes one of the most performed operas from Sydney to Cincinnati, where fatefully, in 1955, a production is being directed by New Yorker Anthony Stevenello, whose nickname is Instant Opera.
He had the nickname Instant Opera because he could produce an opera literally in an instant.
He may be quick, but he ain't sloppy. And there's something about his Cincinnati Turandot that's just not right. Guess.
He was unhappy with the sound of the gongs.
The gongs, the clanging in Anthony's ears never stops. And years later, on a trip to Italy, he looks for something better. Instant Opera hits the instant lottery at the office of Puccini's publisher.
My father found that the publisher Ricordi had the actual gongs they had specially made that Puccini wanted in the production.
It's a startling find.
You want to liken it to playing a Stradivarius, except there's only one set of true Puccini gongs. So my father, being a colorful figure, started playing cards with Ricordi, and he talked him into having a bet. And he won the gongs.
And takes them home to Queens. Now we can return to the summer of 1975, when Howard Van Heining gets hired for a Turandot production in Central Park. Howard already has a collection of more than 1,000 percussion instruments, but no gongs that are right for Turandot. Then he gets a tip. that Puccini's own custom-made gongs are in the Stevenello shop in Queens and may be available to rent.
Howard said, I've got to see them. I've got to see them.
Anthony leads him into the back of his shop, pries open a dusty crate, and reveals 13 heavy bronze gongs. One note of the musical scale on each gong, in Italian. For Howard, gotta see turns to gotta have in a New York minute. No doubt in your mind they're the real deal.
There's no doubt of anybody who really knows about opera that they are the original set of Puccini's gongs.
Howard almost can't bring himself to return the Puccini gongs after the Central Park rental.
He just kept asking my father, hey, if you ever sell them, you promise to sell them to me.
His desire doesn't wane, even after he claims his own princess in 1982 from the City Opera audience.
I came back from the intermission and my friend said, these two guys have asked us out for a drink after the show. Howard and I locked eyes and he said, I'll take the little one.
Howard and the little one soon marry and have 2 children. All the while, Howard adds to his stockpile of percussion instruments.
He started with 1 room. It grew to 6 rooms. And he had a whole room of just timpani shells, huge kettle drums. And the mallet instruments were everywhere.
Then one day, Howard walks in the door of their home in suburban New York with a big announcement.
And he came home with a burlap bag and he said, look what I have. And he dumped out a few of the gongs.
How much did he pay for them?
$8,000.
And do you say holy glockenspiel, the kids need to go to college?
And I was speechless.
Luckily for Howard, his opera-loving wife learns to appreciate the gongs as much as he does.
And they're very special, and I'll show you why. I'm going to play first a regular gong, which sounds pretty good, and this is on stage all the time. Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good to
But
me.
here is Puccini gongs. It's extremely resonant, and that's the sound that he wanted. Would you like to try one?
I'll give it a whirl.
Perfect.
Howard plays the Puccini gongs in operas all over the country, showing them off for music experts everywhere. In 1991, he even has one of the gongs signed by legendary opera singer Luciano Pavarotti.
I see his signature. Yep, there it is.
Howard continues to play with the New York City Opera into his 60s. Then in 2001, he notices a change.
He said, my hands are not right. My playing is not right.
An MRI confirms that Howard's in the early stages of Parkinson's disease, a disorder of the nervous system that often causes tremors. For a musician, that is devastating.
It was devastating for him.
Howard fights the disease and keeps playing until 2009. The following year, he dies of cardiac arrest. He's 74 years old.
He was buried with his sticks.
Really?
I knew that when he got to heaven, he'd be able to play.
But before Howard departs, he leaves Marlene not only a piece of musical history.
We talked before he died. He would like 2 things to happen.
He asks her to set history straight.
It's a big responsibility.
It's a big responsibility.
Here's another quiz question. The Puccini opera La Bohème was adapted into what hit Broadway musical? Rent, Les Miserables, or Hamilton? The answer when we return. So what hit Broadway musical was adapted from Puccini's opera La Bohème? It's Rent, a tale about a group of bohemians living in the East Village of New York City.
Something about Puccini's opera Turandot always irked renowned percussionist Howard Van Heining. Remember, Puccini dies in 1924 before finishing his masterpiece, and another composer, Franco Alfano, is hired to complete it. Does Alfano get it right?
There's no way of knowing.
For Howard, it was all about the gongs Puccini obsessed over. They're prominent throughout his opera, but Alfano's ending hardly features them at all.
It's a jarring transition from when Puccini wrote his last note.
Howard, whose most prized possession was Puccini's custom-made gongs, had one dying wish for his wife Marlene: fix Turandot by selling the gongs for enough money to commission a new ending for the opera. Tall order. Howard bought the gongs in 1983 for $8,000, and Marlene had them appraised in 2010 for, she says, $100,000. Still not enough to get a first-rate composer to write a new Turandot ending.
What's your price?
I think that they're worth between $1 and $2 million. Nothing like this has ever been sold.
Think they're worth $1 million?
Well, you can hope. I'm not sure about that.
Greg Zuber, the Mets' current lead percussionist, whom we met earlier, chimes in. It sounds to me like Puccini had to have these gongs.
He absolutely needed them for the right flavor of the opera, to suggest China in its ancient setting.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Spectacular.
Marlene thinks they're spectacular too, and wants them heard and appreciated. While waiting for a buyer to step up, she rents them to opera houses where they're a big draw.
Howard would want them to be played, and I did rent them out.
Until 2011, when she gets a frantic call about her strange inheritance.
What happened?
What's your strange inheritance story? We'd love to tell it. Send me an email or go to our website, Strange Inheritance.
Now back to Strange Inheritance.
It's 2011, and Marlene Paturo is terrified about her strange inheritance. A rare set of percussion gongs that trace back to renowned opera composer Giacomo Puccini.
What happened?
We were renting them, and they were lost in transit.
Oh, my.
The national carrier who was doing this couldn't find them.
For 3 awful days, no word. Then she gets a call.
It turned out that they were in Newark for 3 days. And when we finally knew where they were, they went on to their ultimate destination.
The mishap forces Marlene to change her tune and stop renting out the gongs.
Howard was more than willing to send them. He loved that they could go to different opera houses, but I feel I can't take that risk.
So Marlene tucks them away, unseen, unheard, and with each passing year, increasingly forgotten by the opera world. She's still hoping to find a way to do as Howard wanted, sell them to a musician or opera company, and commission a new ending to Puccini's Turandot that features the gongs.
It's a big responsibility.
It's a big responsibility, and I'm not the best person to have them. They belong in an opera house.
Then in 2016, music director Anthony Walker of the Pittsburgh Opera hears tell of how Howard Van Heining's widow has Puccini's gongs hidden away in a trunk.
We were very excited to hear that the Puccini gongs were still around.
He implores Marlene to lend him the famous gongs for his upcoming production of Turandot. Marlene relents, but this time she has the gongs hand-delivered. We're there for the first official rehearsal. Everyone is amped up over those gongs.
It makes it much realer. You can smell and taste and feel this thing. It's not some ancient artifact in mothballs. It resonates and it gets people very excited.
This set is so important because we have the sound that Puccini had in mind, which is really amazing.
It's like a Stradivarius. If you don't play it, what's the point? Puccini heard in these gongs how his music should sound.
Marlene still intends to turn her strange inheritance into a new ending that makes Turned Out even more of a percussionist dream, just as her husband envisioned.
Are you hoping that by sharing your strange inheritance, that someone will see them come along and say, here's a check?
You better believe it. That would be a wonderful outcome.
Whatever happens, this performance would surely be music to her late husband's ears.
He had his destiny, and that was to play this music. He loved music and he loved the gongs.
A half dozen other composers have written new endings to Turned Out, and now one more has tossed his hat in the ring. In March 2017, 4 days after his 100th birthday, Maestro Anton Coppola, uncle of film director Francis Ford Coppola, conducted a 2-hour concert in Tampa, Florida, which included his own alternate ending for Turned Out, Gongs, and all. The contest for the perfect ending continues. I'm Jamie Colby. Thanks for watching Strange Inheritance. And remember, you can't take it with you.